thousands of clients coming into my office over the past 30 years telling me that they felt like they were failing at being happy, but you can't fail at an emotion. Happiness, like all emotions, comes and goes. It's not meant to be long lasting. Happiness is dependent on things happening in the outside world. It's how you feel when you get your first kiss, or you see the first snowfall, or you get that sought after piece of clothing. But satisfaction is different. Satisfaction is how you feel at the end of a really productive day, or you finish a really good book, or you have a warm shower. Happiness is fleeting. It's a dopamine hit. It's an endorphin rush. It's an aspiration. It's not a goal. Satisfaction is a goal. Satisfaction is within our control. Satisfaction is something that we can achieve. Satisfaction is something that we can aspire to have within ourselves and is sustainable and within our control. So they're completely different, and we can we can be satisfied and have moments of happiness within our satisfaction, but satisfaction is something that we can have all the time. I suggest to people there's a big difference when you say to your brain when you wake up in the morning, I want to be happy today, as opposed to waking up in the morning and say, I want to end this day satisfied. And when you wake up and tell your brain, I want to end this day satisfied, it puts an totally different perspective on your entire day.
I want to end this day satisfied, and stop telling your brain you want to wake up happy. I love that. That's interesting. Okay. I'm going to mull on that for a couple weeks. When it comes to satisfaction, that is within your control. And you're saying so many people came into your office and were saying, I feel like I fail at happiness. Why do you think we have this perception of happiness as something that we have to achieve or and be in a consistent state of?
Everything is peddling happiness. You see it all the time. I mean, the titles of things are, how can you be happy? The steps to be happy. And when you open these books, I mean, it's mostly in the titles, because when you open the books, a lot of them have a lot of disclaimers about the fact that you really can't be happy all the time. But in the title, it's there as if you can be. And what people remember are titles. They don't remember the disclaimers. And so that's a problem. And that's what your brain is picking up. What's also interesting is that if you look up in the dictionary, the definition of happy is actually contentment. But if you look up in the dictionary, the synonym for happy is joyousness or ebullience, which is not the synonym for contentment. Yeah. So what's happened is we have this sort of like bastardized definition and synonym kind of weird situation for how we've handled happy in the vernacular of our lives. And so what I'm contending is let's look at happy as what it really should be, which is satisfaction, the middle path, what Buddha called it, what Aristotle called it, what all of the philosophers over all the years have called it, which is let's look at the middle path. Let's look at what's neutral. Neutral is fine. Neutral is good. And then let's have happy and sadness and all the other emotions be on either side of neutral. And let's focus on that, as opposed to trying to have people look at what a sexy emotion is, which is happiness, and what's not achievable, and try to sell media based on something that's not achievable, because our brains listen to what we say to it.
So looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there's something interesting here. Looking at redefining happiness as the pursuit of happiness from a goal to being the pursuit of satisfaction as the goal, looking at that satisfaction as the middle path, the neutral, so that it becomes less of a pursuit of this extravagant, less of the pursuit of the extravagant, of the way up above, more of the how do I stay in the center? How do I stay in the middle? And you end up knocking or having less of the kind of coming down crashes by staying in the middle. Am I right in saying that?
That's very well said. That's exactly right.
Fascinating.
It's exactly right.
would it also be the case that if you pursue the center, if you pursue that neutral, that middle, that the longer you pursue that and the more you pursue that, the higher that neutral becomes? Would that be the case?
Neutral is neutral.
Okay. I figured I'd ask. I'm intrigued. Okay.
So, I mean, I think what's interesting to me about neutral is that I think for a lot of people put neutral in the bad category. So if you think of like good and bad, a lot of people think of the world as black and white or binary, which is unfortunate because most of life is lived in the gray area. And I would say neutral is in the gray area. But I find that most of my clients over the years have put neutral in with a bad, on the bad side of the column. And I would say neutral is just neutral. It's just nothing. And so it's just fine. You know, it's when you end the day satisfied, content, fine. It's good. It's just neutral. And neutral will always be neutral. It's not good or bad. And so then you have happy or all the positive emotions on the positive side, and sadness and despair and loneliness and all the other things on the other side. But neutral just stays neutral.
In your practice, you said a lot of people come to you and tend to put neutral on the negative side. So I'm assuming that happens a lot. How do you go about that conversation? How do you go about that conversation? Let's say someone's listening is like, yeah, neutral is terrible. Neutral is shit. How do you go about that conversation?
I mean, I use a lot of humor because I think that it's fascinating that people do that. My contention is, okay, why does neutral end up in the bad category? You know, how come neutral can end up in the good category? I mean, if the world is binary, you could make a case that all of the neutral things that happen to you should go in the good category. Now, all of a sudden, we have, you know, all of your life weighted in the good way instead of in the bad way. Because why is it an arbitrary decision made that neutral should go on the bad side as opposed to neutral going on the good side? It's arbitrary. It does feed a negativity bias if we're going to decide that all of neutral goes in the bad category as opposed to the good category. But why would we make a decision to feed the negativity bias? Instead, let's put all neutral and good if you have to choose to live in a black and white world. I personally would just keep neutral as neutral. But so then the conversation just evolves into, let's just keep, you know, the middle of the road, and think of it as 3 lanes instead of 2.
Okay. Fair enough. Reading your book and hearing you talk through now, there's this idea that's coming into my brain. Are you familiar with Viktor Frankl's quote? Actually, I
mean, I love Viktor Frankl. I don't know
I was like,
quote you're going to say.
I was like, you're nodding your head already.
I mean, you know, Viktor Frankl.
I was like, man, you got this. Oh, you already know where I'm going. Okay, here we go. I got it. When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. It seems, and maybe this is my brain making a far reach, but it seems like there may be a connection here as well. Have you ever considered a connection there between our pursuit of happiness and, as Viktor Frankl called it, they distract themselves with pleasure? So the pursuit of pleasure. Do you see any similarities in what he's saying to what you're talking about?
I think that there are similarities. I think that people will pursue fleeting act of, you know, rushing from thing to thing to thing that they think is going to bring them happiness, instead of leaning into what is going to bring them satisfaction, and then continuing to feel deflated because it's not having the desired result. You can see that sometimes on social media, where you see people posting constant pictures of themselves doing this, and this. And then on the receiving end, we're like, well, those people are living their best lives. But as a mental health professional, I know that the people that are posting all of those pictures, doing all of these things, are definitely not living their best lives. And so, and really all they're doing is just posting, running from thing to thing to thing. But that definitely does not mean that they are satisfied in their lives. They're just, you know, racing around trying to find their best lives, hoping to fill the hole that they have in order to find actual true satisfaction.
So let's dive right into that. What are some of the practices in your book? You outlined 6. Can you go over them to find that satisfaction, to tap into that consistently?
Why don't I just say what the 6 are first, and then we can talk about them in whatever order you want.
Let's do it.
They are avoiding assumptions, reducing people-pleasing behaviors, making decisions, facing fears, closing out tasks, and active self-reinforcement, which you can consider also self-care.
So let's talk about the people-pleasing. That one connects for me personally. I grew up very people-pleasing. That was my go-to for most of my life. And let's talk about that. How does one overcome and push through people-pleasing?
People-pleasing is something that nobody is exempt from. We all are at risk of people-pleasing. One of the reasons that I picked these 6 is because everybody, just like you said, can relate to one, some, or all of these. I have yet to meet somebody that does not relate to one, some, or all of these.
Yeah. And
so it's not surprising that you can relate to at least one of them. And so many of us struggle with people-pleasing behaviors, which is either that we want to rescue people from something or rush into, put our needs behind somebody else's. A lot of people say to me, you don't want me to be a good friend. And that's not what my purpose is in telling people that I want them to reduce people-pleasing behaviors. I do want you to be a good friend. What I don't want you to do is put yourself behind your needs behind everybody else's to the point where you become resentful. The recommendation that I make to people is that they be mindful of that. And I suggest something that's called a resentment check-in, and also mindful communication. So, for example, I have a client whose mother was going into the city frequently to do her laundry and clean her apartment for her and all these things. And her mother was becoming very resentful of doing that. And I suggested to my client, her daughter, that she have a conversation with her mother about it. And she said to her mother, if I need you, I'm so happy to tell you what I need and what I would like. But I don't need you to come in to do acts of service for me. Instead, let's go out to eat. Let's go to museums. Let's go to the theater together. Let's have fun together. And that helped their relationship so much. That's an example of a daughter that has great communication skills. But there may be people that instead need to edit or delegate a request that's being made for them, or instead may have to actually say no. And that's where this resentment check-in comes in. What I recommend to people is that if a request is being made of you and you're not sure whether you should say yes or no, ask yourself if this request was never to be reciprocated or validated or valued in any way ever again. How do I feel in my body? Do I get a twinge anywhere in my body thinking about it not being reciprocated or valued? And if you get a twinge somewhere in your body thinking about that, then maybe you want to think about editing a request, delegating a request, or maybe even saying no. If, however, you ask yourself whether it was not to be reciprocated or valued in any way, and you don't get a twinge anywhere in your body, then sure, say yes. And whatever the request is, you can go ahead and do it.
I remember reading that in your book, and I was walking through the airport listening to that, and I literally paused it, and I had a couple people making requests to me while I was walking through. And so I paused it, did some check-ins exactly like you talked about. And I was like, well, shoot, that was, and I'm usually pretty in tune with my body anyway. But just forcing yourself to put that attention in this, with this specific stipulations of this is what's being asked here. How do I actually feel? How does my subconscious feel? How does the outside of me trying to project that everything's fine, or that, yeah, that's totally okay, I can do that. How would it feel?
Right.
That intention, that was powerful. Very powerful, really helpful.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about a couple other of these that really jumped out while I was reading your book. One was the making decisions. We I laugh here because you said it's funny that I relate to, or it's not surprising I relate to one of them. I relate to most of these.
Great. I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I wrote them for a reason. I'm so glad.
Yeah. And so decisions was a really big one for me. I had a really big change 2018, I think it was. And being like completely indecisive was a huge part from going from indecisive. And I had to make some radical changes in order to get myself to start making decisions and to start saying, okay, cool. Like if this decision, like most decisions can be undone, having that mentality shift, that was huge. And then be like, yeah, there's importance and it changes the way you look at yourself, the way the outlook that happens. I'm getting preachy here. I want to hear from you. What drove you to write the making decisions part of the book?
Honestly, I just love the book, the fact that the book had such a strong impact on you. So I like hearing you talk about it. It's great. The most important thing that I think is critical that I want to have an impact on people is that decisions are guesses. And there's an idea that people have in the world that decisions are right or wrong, decisions are binary, decisions are permanent, and none of that is true. The important takeaway that I want people to have is that there are no right or wrong decisions because everybody, literally everybody, is guessing. People may be guessing with a little bit more experience. People may be guessing with a little bit more education. But anybody that tells you that they're making a decision and that they're not guessing is not telling you the truth. Because we all, common humanity, is that we're all guessing. And so what's important to know is that that lowers the stakes on all decision making because all we can do ever is just make our best guess. And if we're making our best guess, then we can pivot and change course if we make a guess and it's not turning out the way that we expected, as long as we recognize that it was a guess and we're just doing the best that we can. Almost all decisions that we make in our lives, literally almost all decisions that we make in our lives are changeable. We make a lot of decisions in our lives. We have to decide what careers to have, what jobs to have, what schools to go to, what apartments to take, or about our significant others. But by and large, almost all decisions that we make, really almost all decisions are changeable. We can change schools, we can change cars, we can change jobs. We make it seem like they're so high stakes and we make it seem like they're so powerful, but we can change them as long as we have the belief in the ability to have the freedom of mind to change the decisions that we make, because we know that we're taking the most information we have at the time and making our best guess. We can ask some trusted individuals in our lives what their opinion is about what we're doing, but to opinion shop to try to get a consensus among everybody that we know about what they think is the best choice for us doesn't make any sense, because only we have our own DNA and our own fingerprint. So who could make a better guess about our lives than we can?
Why? You partially answered this, but I want to get crystal clear. Why do you think it is that we struggle with making decisions? You talked about that we tend to view them as irreversible was one aspect. Are there other aspects, other reasons why?
There are other reasons. Another reason is that we like to delegate decision-making to other people because it takes the responsibility for the outcome of the decision off of us. And there's a lot of relief in that, especially when we're looking at decisions as so high stakes and having such large consequences. Then delegating would seem like a great choice. It's not until you lower the stakes in the decision making that all of a sudden delegating doesn't seem as necessary. That's another reason that we do it. Another reason is that there's a lot of, posse mentality around decisions. There's a lot of pressure to engage in decisions the same as the people that are around us. People like it when we're all making the same decisions because it validates the decisions that the people around us are making. And so there is a lot of pressure to make decisions that are the same as everybody wants us to make. And so a lot of times we give in to the pressure of the people around us because that's what social psychology is telling us to do. And we give in to the pressure.
This is really interesting. When you have a thought, you have an idea, and it's at the tip of your brain. You can almost grab it. I'm right there. I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I'm going to run with it. Let me know if you think there's a connection here. So I have all my notes right here. So some of the reasons we don't make the decisions, we end up going second guessing and postponing and outsourcing that decision-making process. One is we just try and delegate that to others. Another is looking for that validation from others. We don't have that belief that it is, we have this belief that it's irreversible, right? Those aspects. I know later in the book you talk about being a closer, and we'll get to that in a minute because that one really hit me. Being a closer and how it impacts your self-concept. This decision process, in my experience, has impacted my self-concept tenfold. Shocking. I didn't expect it nearly as much to impact my self-concept. Have you had a similar experience, or has your clients had a similar experience?
Okay, that's part of the whole point of the book, is that each one of these 6 techniques, all of them, impact creating a more empowered self-concept and sense of self. What do I mean by that? An empowered self-concept and sense of self means that we have more self-confidence, efficacy, resilience, self-respect. And all of those things help us build a better sense of who we are as people, as humans, so that we're the same person in each situation that we go into. It gives us a better sense of belonging, and that gives us a better sense of being able to be resilient in all situations. That increases our sense of resilience. It increases our sense of coping. And we can't be resilient or cope or be empowered unless we have a strong self-concept. So for each one of these, the better we feel that we are at problem solving, making decisions, having a feeling of inherent lovability, all of the things that are basically the backbone functions that occur after you learn the techniques that I'm trying to teach. It's because you learn then have this bedrock self-concept underneath it. Then you become the resilient, empowered person that you actually need to be to live a life that's sustainably satisfied and beyond happiness. It's not that making decisions alone in a capsule is what makes you satisfied. It's all of the things that evolve from it. That's what makes you satisfied. And so what you're saying is exactly right. It's building a stronger self-concept. Each one of these things builds a stronger self-concept, is a stepping stone to different things that build a stronger self-concept. And while I was trying to write the book, I sat with millions of pieces of paper and pyramids trying to figure out, how do I explain how this leads to this, leads to this, leads to this? It's like a pyramid. Like, how do I explain that it's all building blocks to a building? Like I'm building a building to try to, it's all foundational to the next foundational piece that, ties together to lead to resilience. But each one is required for the next.
What I found so interesting about what you just said is where we build this resilience and this self-concept so that we can enter, or so that we're the same person in every situation we enter into.
Right. So, yeah.
That resonates.
Right. Well, something that I say to a lot of people is the more confident, resilient, the more self-respect you have, the quieter of a person you need to be, the more secure of a person you need to be. And that's the true sense of belonging, right? You can go from situation to situation and only take yourself with you because you are who you are. So you can be in a situation, people could not agree with you. You can say your point and then people could disagree. Lots of people around the table could be arguing. But if you know who you are, because you have a strong self-concept, it doesn't matter whether anybody agrees with you or they don't agree with you because you know who you are. So they can feel free to have whatever their opinions are, and you can curate some of them that seem interesting to you and keep or discard them. But that doesn't mean that you have to defend who you are, because the only person that you ever need to feel that you need to check your integrity with is you.
Why do you think it is so difficult to embrace that? And our natural reaction is to try and defend, to men to compromise in order to fit in, even if that goes against who we believe we are.
So that's why people pleasing is.
I figured it was going to cycle back around, but I'd go for it anyway.
That's why people pleasing is one of the six. And people pleasing is one of the six because it's hard when, for example, you brought up earlier on about my traveling, right? And that I travel a lot. Traveling is absolutely who I am as a human. I want to experience all different cultures, different people, foods. Like I'm fascinated by people, but I have a lot of people in my circle that are put off by the fact that I would go traveling. They think that it's dangerous, or they think lots of things about it. And so they've definitely over the years sent me articles about the danger of it, talked about the danger of it. I don't feel any particular need to argue with them. I tell them that I appreciate their concern and I'll take it under advisement, or I don't need to bend it, but I will go do, what I think is best for me. Mm-hmm. And so, but that's just me being me. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, evidence of that. I don't have to please them. I don't have to convince them. I don't have to please them. They can think the way they want about it. And if they choose when I get back to hear about the trip, they can hear about it. And if they choose not to hear about the trip, then they don't. But I don't have to come back and tell them, you see, it was okay. I was safe. Like, it is what it is. But that's an example of how, we can get caught up in too much and what other people are thinking about what we're doing.
Interesting. I hadn't put this together, but there seems to be two sides of that getting caught up. One is in the trip example. One is before, to defend your decision to do something. And then the second is if you follow through with it, it's to convince the other person that you were right. Two separate sides of the same coin.
Yep. All of the time.
Hadn't thought of that before. Very interesting. Thank you. When it comes to one of the other parts here for these six, it's the last two were the other that really jumped out for me, is closing tasks and your self-concept again, and then self-reinforcement. And again, the closing side is that's something out of all of these, it's been a progression. That your book has actually been the progression of my last probably 7 years, from assumptions, then conquered people pleasing, then decisions. Fears has been something it's been for a while. Closing tasks has been the last probably 2 years, and self-reinforcement is the one I have yet to step forward into. So I'm so glad we're going to hit that one after, but let's do closing tasks first. What that one for me personally, I got to this closing tasks part through on my own journey. Before I read your book, I got to it from a completely different left field angle. I got to it from doing this program called 75 Hard, which is just 2 45-minute workouts a day, and you're strict diet, no alcohol, reading 10 pages. You do all of this stupid amount of things. Just takes a lot of time for 75 days straight, and that forced, and I ended up doing that for a full year, and that forced me to recommit how would you say that? It forced me to step into and have confidence that when I say I will do something, I will, regardless of how difficult it is, because I just did an insane year of stupid commitment. I went 75 days with 0 artificial sugar, no peanut butter, nothing, because nothing. And that was the hardest thing I could think of at the time, because I was doing ice cream 3 or 4 nights a week before that. Like massive change.
Awesome.
You what?
That's awesome.
Thank you. It was crazy. And that was just the latest, literally like last year or two, the latest addition in my walking through. So I got to that through complete left field, got to that result. What did you see in your clients that made you say, this is really important to write this chapter?
It started when I had clients coming into my office who actually were wildly successful in business. They had either built and sold billion-dollar companies, or they were heads of billion-dollar companies, and they were like, I suck.
We have this idea. Just to jump in here real quick, we have this idea that when people are successful, they don't think they suck. They do. Just like you said, every decision at the top of this, every decision is a guess. We're all guessing here. And you guess when you're just not where you want to be, and when you are where you want to be, you second guess. Like it's all the same process. Okay, yeah, keep going.
So they'd be like, I suck. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that? And what would evolve from that was a really interesting conversation about how, well, I let my passport lapse, or my driver's license isn't up to date, or I have a pile of unpaid bills, or my credit score is terrible, or all of these things that, yes, they were doing really, really well at work, and the rest of their lives were just like a hot mess. And because of that, they'd get all of this positive feedback at work about how, like, you're my idol, you're my mentor, you're my this, you're my that. And all that was going through their minds is like, please don't tell me I'm your mentor. Yeah. Please don't tell me I'm your idol, because I don't deserve that at all. I don't even respect myself. So that was really fascinating to me, that yes, they were closing in some areas of their life, but they weren't closing in all areas of their life. And because of that, it was eroding their sense of self. It was eroding their self-respect and eroding their self-concept. And that was not, definitely not going to work in terms of lifetime satisfaction. There's something called the Zeigarnik effect. Really powerful piece of research. What it is it says that our brains are preoccupied all the times with things that are left undone. That we like to know that tasks that we are working on, we finish. And if we are not finished with them, they like haunt us. And we kind of all know that feeling when we walk into our homes and the laundry isn't put away, or our desks are a mess, and we look at it and we get that little bit of like overwhelmed, paralyzed feeling looking at it. That doesn't necessarily mean we do anything about it. It just means we look at it being like, ugh, like, I know I could do it. I'm not doing it. And that's really annoying. And it's there, like, you could do me. You're choosing not to do me. And so what I decided to do was add closing as one of the 6 techniques. I think it really is critically important for self-concept, and give a lot of suggestions of how people can start to add closing to the list of what their tasks were on a daily basis, to start to work through crossing things off of their list and send a positive message to their brains that I'm not just closing in one area of my life, I'm closing in all areas of my life. I'm making progress, because doing that then does add, start to add more to their self-confidence bucket, their self-respect bucket, their self-competency bucket, effectiveness in the world. And those are the things that then help with self-concept.
In my experience, that's spot on. It makes so much sense. And over who I am post learning how and learning how to be a closer in all of the areas of my life, and then seeing that and integrating that as to part of who I am now versus who I was before. Wildly different. of all of the chapters in the book, that one I think I listened to. I was working out while I listened to it. I listened to it 3 times. I was like, it partially because it's the most recent transition for me, so it's still super fresh. But I was like, this is something so many people need to see. And not only this side that like we'll tie this back to the social media we talked at the beginning, looking at people and have this, they look like they have it all figured out, right? They don't. Like I work with brands who are running 6 or 7, usually around 7 figures, and I help scale them up to 8. Like that's my day job. Super fun. Every single brand I have ever worked with, and I've done it. I've been a part of 2 brands that exited, one for 6 figures, one for 7. And every single time I work with a brand that is an entrepreneur, that is exactly what happens. You're like, oh my God, you're this great person. They're like, man, my life feels like it's falling apart. It's that exact idea. And learning to step into that closer and to say, okay, cool. Like, I may be crushing it here, but I'm not in these areas. So what can I do to level this out, and integrating that part into your personality, into who you are? You can then, like you said, enter a room and you can be the quietest person in the room. You don't need to be here shouting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In my self-confident. And by the way, I think it shows, I happen to think that it shows a lot of closing when people read the chapters more than once. So you've mentioned now twice that you read a few chapters more than once. And I think that that's really impressive because I really do think that when people are motivated by the book, part of being motivated by the book is understanding that if you're really going to have cognitive optimization in order to understand the book, you do have to read it a few times, because I'm not talking about doing something that's like super simple. It's like my book is like going to the gym.
Yeah.
That means that you have to you have to reread it. So I appreciate the fact that you clearly understood the book. You wouldn't have read the chapters more than once. So thank you.
Absolutely. It is very much like going to the gym. Like you show up once, it's not, you'll feel good. You'll get that hormone boost. But like, it's not going to make a huge difference if you don't understand it. One thing to read it, another thing to understand. The last chapter here, and I have a couple other things I want to talk about after that if we have a little time, but the self-reinforce. I really want to hit this in the because I don't have this part. Like I don't. I work and I do consistently very well. I'm not perfect by any means, but I do consistently well on all of the other things. This one, I don't know. I'm going to be real. I don't know what it is. I struggle a lot with that self-reinforce. As I say this out loud, the reasons are coming to my brain, and that makes sense. Gotta love when you study psychology and it comes back on yourself. But can you walk me through some of the key points from the self-reinforce? What drove you to write that, and some takeaways? Because this is the next step for me.
So you're not alone. Self-reinforcement is probably the one that most people have the most trouble implementing. So, I mean, it seems on the face value like, oh, this will be easy. And then I have client after client. I'm like, did you do your self-reinforcement this week? They're like, no.
Yeah.
Like, okay. I mean, it's really hard for people. And the reason for that is because we are a society that is built on getting external validation, that the validation, reinforcement, reassurance that we're taught to get through our lives comes from the outside world. We learn that in the beginning from when we're very young. We get awards, we get participation awards, and we're in sports events and we get, trophies. And then we watch, getting awards when, in award ceremonies for movies, for music, so we're bombarded by situations from schools to media where we're watching that when people do a good job, they get validated and reinforced from the outside world externally by something happening. And that can happen also at home from our parents reinforcing us with words. It can happen with our parents reinforcing us with gifts, but it's all over the place. And there's no model while we're growing up for somebody saying to us, are you proud of you? What are you going to do for yourself? I mean, there's no model of that. There's also no model where the parents are frequently saying, I'm so proud of you, as opposed to any other phrase. And so because of that, it's all very externally driven, which is why it's really hard to make the cognitive shift to I'm proud of myself. What am I going to do for me because I'm proud of myself? Very difficult cognitive shift to make. Why it's so important is that if we're going to create a positive feedback loop to continue to want to and be motivated to do challenging things in our lives, we need to remind our brains that we're the one that gets to set the bar. We're the ones that have to set the bar. And we're the ones that then have to reinforce ourselves to the bar when we hurdle it, because the outside world is fickle and unreliable. It seems to us while we're growing up, because of the award ceremonies and our parents reinforcing us, that the outside world is not going to be fickle and unreliable in terms of reinforcement. But in fact, it is. And the point is, how many times can we all remember that we're thinking about giving somebody a compliment? It's on our minds. We're having a conversation with somebody. We're thinking that either they look good or they did a good job or something. And we're thinking it, we're having the conversation, we're thinking it. And it doesn't go from our brain past our lips to the person. And then like 3 hours later, we're at our homes. We're like, wait, I forgot to say what I wanted to say. Now, do we text? Do we call? Do we say? Of course we don't. We don't follow through and like give a compliment. It doesn't mean we didn't think it. But the other person, the person on the receiving end who didn't receive the compliment that we were thinking, they're thinking, oh, they didn't think I did a good job, or they didn't like my outfit, they didn't like my haircut. Obviously, they're thinking that because that's how we're set up to think that we assume the negative because we have a negativity bias that they weren't even thinking it. But we just don't know anything that the other person was thinking. The outside world is fickle and unreliable in terms of its ability to reinforce us. So we have to take responsibility for doing this for ourselves, which means that we have to say to ourselves, what's the bar I'm going to set for being a good parent that I'm going to reinforce myself, for being a good friend, for being a good human, for being a good worker, for setting like a goal at work, for achieving something. Because at the end of the day, it can't be a goal that is controlled by the outside world. You can't say, I'm going to make a certain amount of money, I'm going to get a promotion, because those things are controlled by external circumstances. And there are too many variables that are outside of your control. It has to be things that are within your control. And when you meet them, there are so many things in the world that you can reinforce yourself with, as long as you tag the reinforcer to the fact that you achieved the bar that you told yourself that you were going to achieve.
I'm going to rewatch this part of the interview a lot, because that is exactly what I have needed. One of the things I have been studying and trying to get a firmer grasp on is this idea of raising your standard, right? Like you don't live out your standard. You actually live out you live out the least that you will accept. And so how can you raise that standard so that that's where you live? And it seems to me you just unlocked a piece that I have been missing. And it's that the self-reinforcement is saying, being conscious and intentional about setting, this is the standard that I will accept in this realm, and this is controlled by me, and then reinforcing that. And that is how you raise that standard.
Right. That's exactly right.
I've been looking for that answer for
that's right,
almost 12 months. Read so many books, you name it. I have tested everything, and I've yet to be able to come up to that answer.
That's right. And by the way, that's why it comes after closing, because it ties into closing, which is why in closing, you also get to decide the standard of closing. So how they're interrelated is you get to decide how you define closing. And once you've defined what closing is, then you also get to define the standard of self-reinforcement. And that's how everything in the book works together.
Oh. Man, I'm getting goosebumps right now. This is so needed. But I know we're running here out on time. So anyone watching, I'm going to ask one more question and kind of take it off. But anyone watching, if you want to get into the assumptions part, if you want to get into the fears, if you want to talk about mood event consistency, which is something that I took a lot of notes on and sent that to a lot of people because that stood out a lot. I study emotions a lot. That's my passion, and so that connected with me. And if y'all want to hear about those, you have to read the book. It's phenomenal. Jen will tell you where to pick it up in just a few minutes. But I want to ask you one more question. And this is a bit more personal, if you're fine with that.
Yeah, sure.
So you mentioned in the book that this was the intro or chapter 1, is right at the beginning, about going through the process of talking to doctor after doctor. Your kid, I want to say it was your son. I apologize if I got that wrong. Your son. Okay. Was having these issues. And so you're going to doctor after doctor and telling you one thing. And then you're like, that can't be right. Telling you another. And what was that process like in the context of what we're talking about, specifically the having that self concept and having that resilience to stick up for yourself against someone in authority, against someone who's like, okay, maybe like this person would probably thinking, oh, this is just a mother who's over worried and doesn't need to, this isn't going to be that serious. Having that self-resilience and that confidence to go to the next and go to the next and to figure out what was going on. What was that like?
I think that the sustainable life satisfaction techniques, the 6 of them were critical in terms of what I went through with my son. So my son, for people who haven't read the book, I mean, I was convinced by the time my son was 3 months old that there was something very wrong with his health. And when I reached out to doctors, they told me that I was, a young and new mother, and there was nothing wrong going on with him. I was dramatic, and pushed me off. And they continued to push me off until he was 3 years old. And when he was 3 years old, they continued to push me off. But by the time he was 3 years old, he was coughing to the point of vomiting. And although they continued to push me off, at that point, I decided to pursue other doctors with other specialties and continue to push. This was despite doctors telling me that, I was making a lot out of nothing. Each doctor that I saw, they came up with a diagnosis that didn't feel like it was hitting the mark for me. They thought that he had asthma or acid reflux or this or that. Nothing felt quite right. And although they would treat him for it, he didn't get better in the way that it appeared to me like he should if they were treating the right thing. And asthma treatment should, make asthma better. Acid reflux treatment should make acid reflux better. And this continued for 9 years of this going on. And many of the doctors decided that I had a mental health issue. They decided he had a mental health issue, and they were very resistant to continuing to help us. If you think about the sustainable life satisfaction techniques, avoiding assumptions, I mean, I could have made a lot of assumptions during that period of time about, what people were thinking about me, what was going on with my son, whether there was nothing going on with my son, whether there was something going on with my son, what the doctors thought about me, whether I should pay attention to what the doctors thought about me. By the way, nobody was supportive of me continuing to pursue doing anything with my son. They felt like I should listen to the doctors. How come I wasn't basically behaving? Same thing with reducing people-pleasing behaviors, same kind of idea. I should be listening to the doctors. And then it goes on with making decisions, what doctors to pursue, what I should do, facing fears, terrible fears, both of what next step to take without any kind of guidance, but also what could be going on with him that I didn't know, this big unknown. And also then closing, deciding to make these doctor's appointments, figuring out next step, and then following through on them. Eventually, I did find a place that was in Colorado and took him to Colorado, and they were the ones that finally did discover what was wrong with him, which was a very serious heart condition that required surgery. But it did take 9 years to get there. But without those sustainable life satisfaction techniques and the problem solving and the belief that and self-confidence that I had that I could find the answer as long as I continued to pursue it hard enough, and that I had the effectiveness in the world and the competency and the problem solving skills to do it, I would have done what everybody else around me was doing, which was listen to the doctors and, and stay back.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. Like I've said in this episode, this book stood out to me a lot. It's, if I had to sum up the last probably 6 or 7 years of my life in phases, almost to a T, you have it up to the present. So I really, really, going through it, it put a lot of pieces together that have been abstract for me. So I really appreciate it. And now with the download during this one, the self-reinforce, like we go, let's do it. This is great. So thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. And if people want to get a hold of you, if they want to grab your book, give all of your information, the floor is yours.
If you want to get in touch with me, my website is guttmanpsychology.com. My last name, Guttman, psychology.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Guttman_psychology. If you want to get my book, Beyond Happiness, The 6 Secrets of Lifetime Satisfaction, you can find that on my website, or you can find it on Amazon or at a bookstore near you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Again, I really appreciate this conversation. This has been a blast.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun talking to you and talking to your audience.